Hello, listeners, and welcome to Pop Screen, part of the Geek Show podcast network. We are that corner of the Geek Show that likes to look at the good, the bad, and the bewildering of movies, either starring about, or in this case, starring and by pop stars. That's Aidan's dog.
Stop. For fuck's sake. We haven't even begun the episode.
I'm your host, Graham Williamson. I'm a critic for The Geek Show and a filmmaker. I also write for horrified.com, the British horror website. I'm joined this week by...
Aidan Fatkin. Go under the username Aidan F on Letterboxd. I'm also back on Twitter under the username Doco and Drummer.
Yes. And the pop star we're covering this week, Aidan, is...
Jimi Hendrix, no. No, it's Barbara Streisand we're covering today.
Streisand.
Barbara Streisand.
Streisand.
For fuck's sake, are we doing this already?
Yes, absolutely. This is, to me, this joke from Licorice Pizza is Barbara Streisand's major cultural footprint over the last decade or so. I am not an expert. I am not a Streisandologist. I will say that up front.
And this episode will come out after the episode you do on Licorice Pizza, isn't it? So
for a moment, I thought you were just going to break off before you mentioned Licorice Pizza. I'd say that this episode will come out. Is that, yeah, unfortunately, this will be released. You can't get out of it this easily.
I could quote Licorice Pizza for days. You're thinking things you think of.
Yes.
God, I love that film.
Me too. But this week's film is not Licorice Pizza. This week's film is The Prince of Tides, Barbara Streisand's 1991 film as director and star, which also featured Nick Nolte. Do you know what accolade Nick Nolte received in the year after this was released?
Is it a Razzie?
It's not a Razzie, no.
Okay, no, never mind.
This film was nominated for several Oscars, but did not win one. However, the year after, Nick Nolte won People magazine's Sexiest Man Alive poll.
Oh, wow, okay.
Which, I mean, I've checked the records. I've checked the records, and David Bowie was alive in 1992, so it's not actually true. But he did win that trophy in a move that retrospectively seems absolutely bizarre.
That is really strange, yeah. I mean,
Yes.
my vote would probably go, if we're talking about 90s Hollywood leading men, I would say Jeff Bridges, but never mind.
Oh, that's a good call, yes. There was a time, I think, back in the early 70s where every single Jeff Bridges poster had to have him shirtless. So, yeah, he would have absolutely made a better choice than Nick Nolte. Nick Nolte, everyone.
Sounds like the Tom Waits syndrome where he just drinks, like, whiskey.
I think most of Nick Nolte's later roles he could swap with Tom Waits, and the film would be not much different. But this is perhaps not a role Tom Waits would be good in, I think.
Yeah, I would agree. I would totally agree. Because can we discuss like the plot synopsis of Prince of Tides?
Yeah.
Because this was a film that I had to bring up because it would be very easy on Pop Screen to just do episodes on, like, say, bands, artists we love, or things like that. And I brought this to his attention for two reasons. Firstly, because that Prince of Tides, it's Barbara Streisand, so Streisand. I'm just going to say it my way. Barbara Streisand. Yeah, because she's not, a pop star singer that I have much familiarity with or anything like that. So it only makes sense and fair to cover like the stars that we don't, tend to talk about, which is fair enough. The second reason is that I watched this film on the UK Criterion Blu-ray release. I don't know whether you were the same or anything like that.
No, I didn't. No.
So because it brought, that was how it was brought to my attention really through that release. So I thought it was like, well, maybe this would be quite an interesting film to tackle on Pop Screen.
It was brought to my attention the first time because it's the subject of two pretty great jokes in classic Simpsons.
Oh yeah.
There's the one in Selma's Choice where Marge remembers her childhood and then stops because she realizes she's just remembered the opening scenes of Prince of Tides. And there's the one in Fear of Flying where Marge thanks her therapist and says that every time she hears the wind whistling through the trees, she'll hear the name Lowenstein. And
it's not Lowenstein, it's Swig. It's Swig, isn't it?
Yeah, yes.
I remember that episode of The Simpsons. I used to watch it like back to back on VHS like ages and ages ago. And but I just want the Zweig character to just like say it's not Lowenstein, it's Stein, like it is a joke to Young Frankenstein.
Yes. Well, that's a simultaneous Young Frankenstein and Licorice Pizza joke now, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. I hadn't. We didn't get this one through on Criterion. We do often get the Criterion collection Blu-rays throughout the Geek Show, but this was not one of them. And it's interesting that it's out on Criterion because I
think that might have just been like a pandemic thing because I think that was like 2020 or something.
Oh, it could have been. Yeah, I didn't think of it that way. Yeah. But I remember a lot of jokes about Barbara Streisand's directorial career that mostly centered on Yentl rather than this. And it's interesting that she is now in the Criterion collection because I was trying to gauge how respected she was as a director back when she was making these things. And it's notable that both this and Yentl got many Oscar nominations, but none of them were for Best Director. And this was at a time where not like it is now, where any relationship between the Best Picture nominations and the Best Director nominations are purely coincidental. But back then, if you got a Best Picture nomination, that was considered a guarantee of a Best Director nomination. But that didn't happen. This was up for Best Picture, but not Best Director. And Billy Crystal, who was hosting that year's Oscars, even commented on how weird that was.
Yeah, I mean, it is strange to see a name like Barbara Streisand in that collection, to be honest with you, because, you know, you think of the high gamut kind of directors, you know, like your John Hustons or your William Wylers, which is funny because I think Streisand did get her career started, or the acting career started through Funny Girl, which is a William Wyler film, isn't it?
Oh, right. I hadn't checked the director on that, but you might just be right. Let me check.
I think that's how she started. And we could have done like A Star Is Born, but I really didn't want to do A Star Is Born because...
It was William Wyler. You're quite right. I agree. There is something... In any version, there is something powerfully unappealing about the story of A Star Is Born for me, and I don't quite know what that is.
Yeah. So I just think it would have been interesting to just talk about a directorial career, because this is based on a Pat Conroy novel, isn't it?
Yeah, and Pat Conroy loved the film.
He did. He certainly did. I think he actually wrote a note or something like that about how much he admired Streisand for her ability on this.
Calling her the Queen of Tides, yes. Yeah.
Which is lovely, I thought.
Yeah, there aren't many Hollywood stories of the writer loving the book, so it's nice to highlight one when it happens. The writer loving the movie, sorry. Yeah.
Can you imagine if Stephen King did that for Stanley Kubrick of The Shining?
Yes, yeah. But she does have this very singular position in Hollywood, Streisand, in that she is reliably popular even at a time when there are not many women in Hollywood directing or even starring in high-grossing films. There's a poll of the top 10 money-making stars that film exhibitors put together every year. She was in it from 1969 to 1980, and she was frequently the only woman on that list. You know, the 70s New Hollywood has many delights, but big star roles for women, not so much, not often.
Yeah. And in this particular film, Prince of Tides, it's very much the kind of 90s Hollywood melodrama that you get. Like, I remember like my nan had a collection of them on VHS back in like the late 90s.
Yeah.
This wasn't one of them, unfortunately, but you know, films like Fried Green Tomatoes or The Bridges of Addison County, possibly even like Stand By Me or something like that. So it certainly falls into that vein, even down to like the James Newton Howard score, which I'm sure we'll get into. So can we talk about can we talk about the plot of this? Because it's
almost a mystery story, isn't it? The Prince of Tides. It's not. There is crime in it, although it's not primarily a crime story, but the structure of it is essentially almost bringing a sort of Agatha Christie-style narrative to psychoanalysis, which is something bad has clearly happened, and we have to go through and find out what it is.
Yeah, and it delves in that nature through like great chemistry between Nick Nolte and Streisand herself as Lowenstein, the character. And I'm just going to come out and say this right now, even if it's like a 90s Hollywood melodrama, and I can be very iffy on those subjects, I really liked Prince of Tides.
Oh, right, interesting. I had a few more problems with the film, but I think there are really great things about it, and I think one of them is, as you say, that relationship between Streisand and Nolte, which gets past the fact that it is one of my least favorite Hollywood romance tropes, which is the I have irresistible sexual chemistry with my therapist. It's like, well, that's not so much a romance for the ages as it is medical malpractice, if we're honest.
True.
But
no, it just weirdly clicked for me, and I don't know why, because normally I wouldn't be attracted to this at all, as I was saying before. But again, just something down to the craft of it and how it feels like in the opening sequence where you have the James Newton Howard score, as we mentioned earlier, as well as like just very like Malachian kind of inspired shots. I know I'm talking to the resident Malachian expert on this subject, and of like, say, like the river, and obviously Nolte introducing like the whole shebang as Tom Wingo. Tom Wingo, by the way.
Tom Wingo is a name that belongs in a season of Fargo, if you ask me. It's got character. But yeah, and how did you feel about Wingo when we first meet him? Because the opening of The Prince of Tides is like a Nick Nolte charm offensive, isn't it? It makes it very clear that Nolte is one of this film's major assets.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't sure where I was going to love his character or not, or hate him, because what you're dealing with here is like, because he's a happily married man at this point when we first introduced him. Obviously, it can be a bit rocky at times because his missus is obviously later on in the film, because we're going to delve into spoilers with this, because we've had like and his missus is like having an affair behind his back in like casual conversation over the phone. It's brought up, and he slowly but surely does the same with Lowenstein as well.
Yeah.
And at first, I wasn't sure how I felt about that, because you're also tackling with something like, because you're tackling with subject on his sister, like attempting suicide, obviously affairs as well. And part of me thinks, this is going to be either like, if it's done like really badly, because the last episode we did it on was the Oscar. Yeah. And that's a melodrama. The last episode that we recorded, and that's an episode where it's the cinematic equivalent of watching like the Hindenburg disaster, when something like flagpole moment of like he's like bad taste but done incredibly crudely.
It's one of those things, isn't it, where you can talk about melodrama as being a low form, but that's not really fair. I think the difference between a good melodrama and a bad melodrama is that you have to have someone in a senior position who really has conviction for all of these plot elements and who can say, look, even at its most cliched, this is something I believe in, this is something that could happen, this is something that moved me. And the Oscar visibly does not have anyone who is thinking that way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and kudos to Streisand, because obviously she takes the material very, very seriously.
Completely, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's odd, really, because by this point she was one of a pretty small number of people in Hollywood who specialised in this material. You mentioned Funny Girl earlier, and Funny Girl is a great musical, and it's kind of like the glass slipper for actresses who are not maybe conventionally attractive, that they can be in that play, and it's just a great leading role for them. I note that there's going to be a new Broadway production soon with Beanie Feldstein, who I think is just great.
Right, okay.
So, yeah, it's that kind of role.
That sounds cute.
And by the early 90s, she had staked out this position, which is kind of unexpected when you look at how she began. She had staked out this position of absolute unwavering sincerity, you know, that often made to the target of a certain kind of mockery. I mean, I remember people were always talking about Yentl when I was growing up as if it was like the most insane Hollywood actor ego trip, which I don't think it is. I don't think it's top 20, you know.
Yeah, I've never seen Yentl, so I can't really leave a comment. I mean, we could, like I said, we could have done Yentl, but I think Prince of Tides probably had more muscle behind it.
And I just think it's like, it's not that the film is bad, or it's not even that the film is vain. I mean, my God, if you're an actress in Hollywood and you just want to make a movie where you look sexy and cool, maybe playing a woman who dresses up as a boy to study at a Hasidic Jewish school, there are better tactics, right? There are better directions you can go in than that. But I think it's just that this kind of material has a kind of golden age Hollywood feel that was very alien to anything else going on in American cinema at that point.
Which why I brought up the Malachian influence earlier, because it's like very sweeping, very early on, like around the Ringo estate, and like I guess like Southern America or something like that.
Yeah,
not that Southern America. I mean like
the
American,
Deep
like
South.
Yeah, Deep South. Yeah. So it works that way and pure, because it is a really good looking film, really handsomely shot in that way. Who's the cinematographer on this, actually?
I'm glad you asked that. I looked this up because I had the exact same thought. It's a guy called Stephen Goldblatt, who's I expected him to be like I thought maybe this guy shot something like Out of Africa or some other 80s Oscar film. Not the case. He shot the first two Lethal Weapon films.
Wow.
And the Joel Schumacher Batman films, which I guess that demonstrates range.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's quite a surprise. That wasn't expected.
And you imagine if he got his colour gels mixed up and Batman and Robin had to be shot in this sort of golden magic hour sunset, and Prince of Tides was all in neon colours.
Oh, man. God, I could just like imagine like the Arnold Schwarzenegger puns like seeping through like the sweeping cinematography. That is brilliant.
He also has another very prestigious pop music credit, which I was unaware of, that he shot the promo photos for the White Album.
Okay, right, yeah.
Apparently the Beatles wanted to go with a young, less well-known photographer after collaborating with, you know, the best in the world before that. And yeah, Stephen Goldblatt, he got the gig.
That's a very interesting bit of information. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because like I say, it's like a very well-crafted film.
Yeah.
For what it's trying to do. I mean, you know, all the sweeping shots, even when it gets to New York, where it becomes more like a psychodrama. And I'm naturally drawn to psychodramas because, you know, I'm the resident Ingmar Bergman fan. So, you know,
yes.
well, hand held up high. Yeah, I admit that. So, but it delves it. I mean, if there's one book there, I mean, I would have liked to have seen more of like, say, like the development between Tom Wingo and his sister. I do think that gets a bit glossed over for me.
It's strange that, isn't it? Because his sister's suicide attempt is the inciting incident that kicks off the entire plot. And yet she isn't really there. It's one of it's one of the holes in the drama. It does remind me of, and I will preface this by saying I think this film is nowhere near as bad as the film I am about to name check. But that part of it did remind me a bit of Promising Young Woman, where you have this woman whose death is like the catalyst for Carey Mulligan to do everything that she does in that film. And we never see her, and I don't think that film gives a shit about her. I think the Prince of Tides clearly cares more for Tom's sister, but it's not about her.
It is absent, yes. And then like 2.5 hours, I would have liked to see Tucker's, because all we get really is like brief shots of like, say, Wingo like combing her hair or reading her a book, which are lovely sequences, and I wanted more of that. But I guess that's also kind of a good complaint with Streisand just effectively cooking up something done really tastefully, actually, I think.
In terms of Streisand as an actress, one thing that I was interested in, particularly since, as I say, you have Yentl before this, and it had been awarded. It had, got some Oscar nominations, but it had been criticised as a vanity project. Do you think Lowenstein is a good star role?
For Streisand?
Yeah.
Well, I'm in two mindsets, because I think Streisand plays it really well. I think, for, say, a singer-turned-actress, she really does command the screen very well. I think it's just a matter of the fact of how the character positions herself, if you know what I mean. And I don't know how I feel. It's like it's a very strange complex once you get into the rhythm of the film, because I think it's like a very rhythmic film with how the dialogue's handled, how it cuts back to the flashback sequences, etc., of Wingo's past, etc. And it can also be a deeply disturbing film for a Hollywood romance.
Yeah.
So and for the Lowenstein character to be like the catalyst, like the full marker of being in that frontal position of like trying to obviously control and get deeper into it. I mean, it can be a complete turn off if it's done like the wrong way. But I think, Streisand works it in her favor.
I think she's good in it. I think what interested me is that maybe when this was announced, some of those people who were damning Yentl might have said, "Oh, Streisand's doing it again. She's given herself the star role in a new film. She's a glamorous, successful career woman in it, and she gets to have an affair with Nick Nolte, who, as we've discussed, is the sexiest man alive." I don't get it, but People magazine said it, so it must be true. And yet, in the film, and I think this is ultimately a good film, a good decision for the film, but in the film, she takes a step back. It's not an unflattering role. It's not a boring role, but it's not her story.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, because even then, because even if you look at like the poster for this, I mean, you like I say, you would assume it's like a sweeping romance, because Lowenstein is like in Wingo's arms, they're cuddling over the sunset, etc., etc. But their romance, it only really happens in like the final half an hour of the film. After that, there's a lot to build up.
Did you have a sort of strange feeling when that shot appeared in the film? Because I was trying to work out what it was, and I just think it's because movie posters nowadays do not incorporate actual stills from the film. And when they actually embraced, as you say, quite close to the end of the film, it was like someone had said the title. All I needed was for Barbara Streisand to say, "Oh, Nick Nolte, you truly are the Prince of Tides," and it would have been perfect. It would have had everything.
And you are my Queen of Tides. Cue James Duke Howard score, Wooden Violent. It's I didn't really get that feeling, to be honest. I mean, I was expecting that shot to turn off, but at the end of the day, I mean, it's kind of expected, to be honest.
We've mentioned James Newton Howard's score a bit, and I get the sense that you are itching to talk about this, because my main feeling about it is that there is a lot of score there.
There is a lot of score, and some of it's beautifully handled, but again, it goes back to like thinking like the Prince of Tides is like expected to have like this kind of score. I mean, you're not expecting like a Cliff Martinez kind of synthophone
Hello.
soundtrack, are you? It would be great, but it wouldn't work.
Yeah.
So yeah, in a lot of ways, I mean, James Newton Howard, what else did he do?
Most famous, I think, for Titanic, which
makes sense. I mean,
it's the kind of score that you have to assume he got off the back of this. Or did he? Wait, am I right about that? Have I misremembered that?
Because I'm certain Titanic came after.
It did, yeah. I'm just thinking, did I misremember that he'd done that?
Oh, the Postman he did as well, yeah.
Oh wow, okay. I have misremembered that. Who did the score for Titanic?
Here we go, live research centre time.
Exciting scenes of people looking things up on the internet, listeners.
Oh, damn it. Right. Okay, hang on. I've got it here. Music by James Horner.
Oh, James Horner. Right. Yes. Yeah, fair enough. I'm looking down James Newton Howard's actual list of credits, and it is more eclectic than I thought. There certainly are some romantic melodramas and romantic comedies in here. There is also Space Jam.
Fantastic. Even the
dogs off.
Dogs off, yes. As soon as Graham said Space Jam, there we go.
You know what dogs are like. They love Space Jam. Someone has to.
It's Michael Jordan. You know, you can't dislike Michael Jordan. He's America's greatest athlete. Anyway, yeah, back to this.
Oh dear. Yeah, he did a lot of M. Night Shyamalan's early stuff. Oh, he did the score for Collateral by Michael Mann. That's a great movie. Yeah, there's not much that you can nail down here. There's not much of a sense where you can say, oh, James Newton Howard, he does that kind of movie, which is fair enough. I think that's admirable.
Yeah. So how did you feel about the score? Is it just...
I have to admit, it bothered me a fair bit. I would have liked a lot less of that score. And there were moments, particularly during the scenes where Tom is training Dr. Lowenstein's son to play football, which I think could have been sort of cute little scenes, nice little breathers in between the more heavy stuff. But Newton Howard's score is just going balmy in those scenes, I think.
Yeah, I mean, like I say, and you know, that's perfectly understandable. You know, I mean,
Americans are sentimental about football. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, and it's just a matter of, I mean, it's not as like on a badly done scale as, say, again going back the Oscar, where it's just like constantly just in your face the whole time and penetrating your eardrums.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, I kind of liked it. It's just James Newton Howard score. I understand completely, but you know, music is just like, you know, one man's glimmer is like another man's. I don't know where I'm going with this. One man's glimmer is like another man's, you know, hatred.
One man's glitter is another man's better film that does not star Mariah Carey, I think. Yeah. I'll tell you what.
There's another film we can do for Pop Screen.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. Another director who James Newton Howard has worked with, which I think is extremely significant considering what we've been talking about earlier, but he's done some work with Terrence Malick.
Yes, there we are. Comes full circle.
Yeah. But yeah,
and like I said, like Graham said, the score isn't like that all the time. There's also like the harrowing sequence where we're going to have to like talk about where it's just completely absent, where Wingo recites what happened to him, his sister, and his brother, actually, I think, one difficult night.
Yeah, the trauma that is at the root of. And I think it's interesting that it's portrayed as both at the roots of his sister's sort of depression.
Mental health problem. Yeah, mental health issues,
and in a strange way, his own kind of ebullience, his own determination to just sort of charm his way past any problems and just move on as soon as he can, is that there was a home invasion and the wife of the family and the kids were all raped during it. And there's a very, I'm glad you mentioned this in the context of the music, because visually it is very tastefully handled. And there is a moment when Tom is talking about being raped, and you think, okay, I was not expecting an early 90s Hollywood film to go there. But it has this rock and roll on the soundtrack, which I thought was very strange. I'm not going to say it doesn't work, but it's odd.
I'm glad you picked up on that, because that was another thing where it's just like, I mean, it's not like it's like ill-advised or anything like that. It's just like, it sticks out a bit, and you just think, well, I wouldn't have minded if they played like the rock and roll song at the start, and like say one of the home invaders, like, I don't know, like takes a baseball bat and just smashes the record player before obviously they do commit the crime, they commit the rape.
Yeah.
If that worked, then fair enough. But if it's still playing, it's just like, it's kind of like an odd nugget of information that doesn't really quite work.
I was trying to think what Streisand was trying to evoke by it, because of course in like a year after this, anyone who uses rock music in the scene of violence is doing it because Quentin Tarantino does it. But this is slightly too early for that to be an influence. I did wonder if Barbara Streisand was a big fan of Blue Velvet. I hope so.
That's interesting. That is interesting thought. Yeah. Because there's that scene in Blue Velvet where Frank Booth beats the living daylights out of Kyle MacLachlan's character, and it sets to that soundtrack in the car. Yeah, I do recall that. Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way.
And it's interesting because it's subtextual in the finished film, but Lynch's original script has a very heavy implication that Jeffrey, the Kyle MacLachlan character, is raped in that scene.
Yeah. So, no, that does make a lot of sense if Streisand took effect on it, to varying degrees, I think. But
it's just, it makes a certain amount of sense, but it is very, very weird about thinking about Barbara Streisand kicking back with a David Lynch film.
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit about the supporting cast in this? Because we mentioned Nolte, who's great in it. Streisand, like I say, is great in it. I was not expecting, obviously, Prince of Tides to, it's a romance film, and then like 30 minutes into the film, George Carlin to appear.
George Carlin! Yeah, I absolutely agree. That knocked me sideways, and I think the character he's playing is really interesting.
Because this was at a time where, like George Carlin was in like his heyday with his comedy work and his stand-up work. So, and I greatly do. I haven't seen much of his stand-up routines, but from what I have seen, he is like great, especially how he tackles like themes like religion or Christianity or things like that.
Yeah, he was, and it's interestingly against his image too, isn't it? Because his image at the time was that he was a really hard-hitting political satirist at a time when, satire wasn't really a career choice, that like it is now. You couldn't get on a satire circuit. It was still, the prosecution of Lenny Bruce was still in fairly recent memory at this time. So it's really strange and wonderful to see him roll up in a film like this. It is very unexpected.
Yeah, it's a pleasant surprise. I mean, it's like, because obviously we get to see him like obviously being basically like Mingo's friend, like he hasn't seen for a long time. I know that's probably not taken out of context likely, but that's how it feels at come across, because they also get that party sequence with Lowenstein and kind of like a whole street worth of people from New York just rocking up and just having a little bit of fun.
Well, this is the other main strand of the film, which I think works very well, although I think as time goes by, I sort of have a bit of a sweet tooth for stuff like this. But the other thing about Prince of Tides, apart from being a film about trauma, apart from being a romance film, is that it's also a culture clash comedy, right?
In a way, yes. Carry on.
In that, I mean, Tom is basically the South made flesh. And every time he is drawn up on his determination to sort of run away from his problems and to joke about them rather than confronting them, his response will be, that's the South, that's the Southerner in me, that's what we do. And in order to reunite with his sister and to work with Lowenstein to find out what's at the roots of her trauma, he goes up to New York. And his neighbor in New York is a gay man played by George Carlin at a time when it is really unexpected to see gay characters in Hollywood films that aren't comedies. You know, 2 years after this, you've got Philadelphia. And I think the physical contact that Tom Hanks and Antonio Banderas have in Philadelphia, it's about as much as Tom has with George Carlin's character in this, where they hug at the start, and
shortly after you would also have something like Mike Nichols' Birdcage as well. Which I believe also tackles like the gay community as well in a very different way, like obviously with Robin Williams and I forget who else was in it actually. I know it was a remake of La Cage aux Folles, wasn't it?
I forget who was in that, but you've also got like in and out towards the end of the decade, which is, I don't like that film, but it's kind of interesting. It's positioned as an issue comedy. It's like trying to hedge its bets. It's like, what are the two areas where we can discuss gay people in Hollywood right now? Comedy and a big Oscar season issue movie, and In and Out is very much trying to be both, which is sort of retrospectively interesting.
I mean, dicey. Speaking of which, another supporting role who, I mean, I did recognize the name. I wasn't as surprised he was in this as, like, say, Carlin or anyone like that, but Dutch guy, hang on.
Oh, Jerome Crabbe.
Yes, who the last I saw was in Paul Verhoeven's The Fourth Man.
Yeah, basically the same film, I think, that and this, aren't they? Very similar movies.
And I mean, I know you enjoyed The Fourth Man. I mean, I had a bit more. I had a bit more of a problem with it because it's just one of these films where I guess it's like Verhoeven, kind of like, again, unfiltered, but I don't know, all the material doesn't quite stitch together well for me. It's just kind of taste, really.
I think he's definitely doing his Verhoeven thing in it. I find it easier to appreciate those films than I do the more acclaimed ones where he's trying to smuggle it into a Hollywood format. Like, I know it's easy to beat up on Showgirls, so I won't bother, but even more well-regarded stuff like Starship Troopers I find very hard to love. But
which is fair enough,
Verhoeven being Verhoeven, I just want to ruffle his hair. He's just a naughty schoolboy.
I'm kind of looking forward to Benedetta, by the way.
Yeah, me too. It's been a justifiably long time since anyone made a movie about lesbian nuns, and I'm glad that there's still someone like who's out of time enough to go for it.
Yeah, and Crabbe, I mean, he plays basically the Ponzi Lowenstein husband.
Yeah,
Lowenstein's husband, basically. He's a well-regarded concert violinist, quite smug, quite up his own arse. The first time we see him, he approaches both Wingo and Lowenstein's son, who was actually played by
Streisand's son. Yeah,
it was. So and you wonder that because it's just like, oh, they have very similar noses. That's great casting there. And then I look it up, it's just like, oh right, it is actually Streisand's son.
Her son with Elliot Gould, which fuck me, there's a power couple there, isn't there? That's iconic. Yeah, that's good genes.
And then even then, I mean, I don't think like Crabbe's performance is terrible or anything like that, but it's very much like that. Like he is a foreign actor export in a Hollywood role, kind of thing. You know,
you're never going to play the hero, are you?
Yeah, it's just like, it's kind of unfortunate that, is it?
Yeah, I sort of feel a bit that way about both of the lead actors' spouses. I think this would just be a much simpler film if, if maybe just one of them was married or they were both divorced. There's a pretty good reason why Tom would have trouble holding a relationship together. You could have integrated that into the plot very easily, but it feels like too many subplots, even for a film that's like 2 hours and 10 minutes. It just feels that is something that cannot be satisfyingly dealt with in the course of this film.
Could have been done like more focused. It had a lot more focus and a lot more time. And like I say, it has plenty of time. It's like 2 hours and 10 minutes. I think it runs like the same length as, say, something like Fried Green Tomatoes or say something like that. It's just like, there's a lot of effort in there. And even when Streisand is focusing on what she wants to do, you can commend her for that, really.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's interesting reflecting on her journey as a director, because like I say, when I was growing up, I heard a lot of jokes about Streisand. There was a I must admit, very funny Craig Brown column in Private Eye, which was like a spoof interview with her, and she said, I think Hollywood's conservative. I've been trying to shop around a Nelson Mandela biopic, and even though I tell them I'll direct, I'll play the lead, they're still not interested. And that joke was basically how she was seen at that point, as someone who would just shoehorn herself into the lead, even if she didn't fit. But it's very interesting that she's on Criterion now, and I think if you look at this in the context of modern Hollywood, where even like 70s slasher movie sequels have to pretend to be saying something deep about trauma, it's definitely ahead of the curve in that way.
Yeah. But no, like I say, I mean, I liked Prince of Tides a great deal. I think, like I said, I mean, I do think it's flaws. I think it's teetering on great for me, just teetering, but there are a couple setbacks. I mean, namely with the last act and how it develops. I think maybe possibly could have needed like another redraft. It's funny you mentioned like the slasher sequence, because I looked at the extras on my copy of the Criterion Prince of Tides. Guess who interviews Barbara Streisand for like an interview sequence on a series called Director's Chair even.
Okay, so is it a series where directors talk to directors?
Yes, basically.
I'm gonna bet Wes Craven was a big Barbara Streisand fan. I'm close, aren't I?
Yeah, you're very close. Robert Rodriguez.
Okay, that I wouldn't have got. That I would not have got.
That was really bizarre when I looked at the extras. It was just like, wait, hang on, the guy who did the Machete films, the Spy Kids films, El Mariachi, what?
How strange. But, I can see why her reputation as a director has grown, because I'm looking at the list of films that she didn't get made when she kind of stepped back from cinema in the 90s. She's only had a couple of acting roles this century, and more troublingly, one of them is Little Fockers.
And I think that's how I got to know Streisand through. It wasn't Little Fockers; it was the one before it, Meet the Fockers, because that American comedy,
too,
the American comedy thing, and rampant during the noughties, and it's just like, ugh.
But you look at some of the things she didn't get off the ground and you think, all right, she's ahead of the curve on some of this. Like in the late 2000s, she was trying to adapt Larry Kramer's play The Normal Heart about the AIDS crisis, which was adapted a couple of years back by Ryan Murphy. She was trying in the 2010s to make a film about Catherine the Great, which nowadays I believe 97% of all television is based on the life of Catherine the Great. It's like, that's an unfair generalization. There's also fucking cop shows all the time. Cops and Catherine the Great. What a golden age of fucking television we're living in right now.
Yeah, it's just like, you wonder why her career died after like a third film. Directing career, I mean.
Yeah.
I mean, because I do think she has like talent. She knows how to handle. I mean, it's not like the case with like, say, 200 Motels, where he is a musician and Frank Zappa like trying to get the basic elements of filmmaking, but not doing it, not knowing how to handle it, or not transferring his musical talent over to his filmmaking industry. With Streisand, she knows how to do it. She knows how to put a scene together. She knows how to direct actors. She knows how to do that. It's just kind of like the edges around it where it's just a bit rough.
And it's fascinating to think of someone like Streisand, who in a lot of ways, and not just her age, is old Hollywood. You know, she broke through doing big, like glitzy Hollywood musicals right at the moment when that form became essentially obsolete. And there is a part of her that you think would be very at home in like 30s or 50s Hollywood, making those movies all the time. But like I say, when you look at those unmade projects, you think, is it me, or was no one ready for that yet? And in a strange way, looking at Prince of Tides, you think, is it me, or was no one ready for that yet? For all it was a big success. You know, I think its treatment of trauma, particularly male trauma and masculinity, I think its treatment of gay characters is massively ahead of its time. Massively.
Yeah. And you got to commend her for that, because it is just like, and why Pat Conroy, advocate for it, because it is just it is a very tasteful film. It does have its flaws, I will say that, but it's, you can kind of understand. It's an oddity in the Criterion collection for sure, but kudos to them.
It makes more sense than it does at first blush. Yeah. I think in terms of things in this film that are very ahead of their time, there is one music cue that I have to mention. When Tom goes to the party that Lowenstein's at, and it's kind of...
I think I do recognize the song, but I carry on, yeah.
It's not exactly a gay event, but the implication is, look, it's just a New York high society event. There's gay people, there's straight people. Tom walks in there and gets hit on by a guy, and he copes with it really admirably, which I think is very charming. Like, there's a lot of Hollywood films around at the time that would just treat that as an excuse to beat the shit out of the guy, but this is not one of them. But the music that's playing is Monkey by George Michael.
No.
Yeah. Now,
no.
Did Barbara Streisand know something that the rest of us didn't back then? Because this is like 7 years before George Michael was outed.
Yeah, that is... What do you know? It's just like I want like a psychiatrist to sit Streisand down in like...
We can
absolutely tell me more.
We can make a very meta follow-up to Prince of Tides where Nick Nolte like takes Barbara Streisand back through her life and says, when did you find out that George Michael was gay?
Yeah, that's a great note. I can tell you my favorite scene in this, where it's like very tastefully done humor. It's where, because we haven't mentioned like Tom Wingo's brother.
Yeah.
Again, there's another strand that's kind of there, but it's not really kind of developed there. But it's when, and you do get elements that their father was both Nolte's character and his sister, and his brother was quite a dickhead, basically.
Yeah.
And it's that scene where, he's talking in a southern drawl. I'm trying to watch the TV. Why can't you kids just go away? And there's his brother with a rifle, shoots the TV.
Yes.
And it's a great scene. I burst out laughing when I saw that scene.
Do you think an Elvis reference? Because when I see someone shoot a TV, all I can think of is, I think it was an urban myth, but the idea that Elvis shot a TV if he hated what he was watching. And there is a Streisand Elvis link, because Elvis was originally going to play the Chris Christopherson role in her version of A Star Is Born.
Oh, right. Possibly. That might be a hat tip off to Elvis. Yeah.
Maybe. But yeah, that is a great scene. I like Brad Sullivan's performance as their father. I think that's a very difficult role, because there is nothing sympathetic at all in it. There is no like extra layer to that character which makes him more understandable. And that's an oddity of the film in a lot of ways. Everyone else is explicable, but he's just monstrous.
Yeah, because he's kind of like the looming threat over it all, basically the insidious figure that's from the past who's, you know, just really quite tenacious and holds grip. Because the first time you see him, he's like obviously just like complaining about like the food on the table.
Yeah.
And then it's just like, because he complains it's like dog food or dog shit or something like that. And then obviously the wife goes and fixes him something else. Like, and I just wanted him to say in like the southern drawl of a voice, jambalaya. Because it's just like that's real food, and you know, something like that. Because it just like feels, oh great, we've gone a full like Night of the Hunter mode.
Yeah, that's interesting, that, because I think Tom lays the southernness on more than the film does. I think with Tom saying, oh, I'm a southerner, it's what we do, is obviously kind of a defensive strategy against going deeper. But I mean, I've seen some very hammy Hollywood presentations of Southern culture, and this is not really one of them, I think.
Before we have to end the episode on this, name the worst one.
Oh, Beast of the Southern Wild. I fucking hate that movie.
I've never seen. Yeah.
I watched that movie and I thought, is there anyone in the Deep South who eats with a knife and fucking fork? Is there anyone who does that?
Cue like Leonard Skinner over the soundtrack. It's just like, I've never seen Beasts of the Southern Wild, but I remember it being lauded at the time, but even then I have no interest in it whatsoever.
It's such a weird film to become big at that point, and it just, because it's I can't remember whether it's explicitly set in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina or whether it's just doing one of those nudge wink sort of, there was a big storm down in the south about 6 to 8 years ago, and it's like, yeah, just say Katrina, you fucking coward. But it reminded me how absolutely obscene it is that Hurricane Katrina, unless you count Spike Lee's documentaries, Hurricane Katrina has not yet had its United 93, but in that moment, it has absolutely had its extremely loud and incredibly close.
I mean, the closest you can get if it's done like well is probably, even then, I don't even think it's like based on Hurricane Katrina. It's probably like not Mike Nichols, Jeff Nichols' film, the other one, Gimme Shelter.
Oh yeah,
the one with Michael
Take Shelter.
Yeah, Take Shelter. That's it, not Gimme Shelter.
It's not the same thing, but you can definitely read that as kind of an attempt to process the aftershock of Hurricane Katrina. It's like there is a very small detail in Fincher's A Curious Case of Benjamin Button, and I mean, I like that film more than most people, but it's
less Fincher. Less it.
Well, I think that was Hollywood's first attempt at getting to grips with Katrina, and it's just this like minor detail in a story about whimsical white people, and you just think, it's not the story. That's not the story of that event.
Yeah. So anyway, I mean, Prince of Tides, an oddity for sure, but it's the one that I kind of have, a soft spot for. I don't know.
It's I can still see a fair bit of the kind of Hollywood stylization that I found hard to deal with when I was young in it, because it is from that era. But I think there is more meat here than I was expecting, and I think there are parts of it that have aged in a way that does Streisand nothing but credit.
Yeah.
So yes, if you enjoyed that, listeners, you can get a free bonus episode. Well, not free bonus episode. You have to donate to our Patreon. A free bonus episode apart from the stuff you pay for by donating to our Patreon every month. You can also get unrestricted access to our other movie podcast, Directors Uncut, where we deal with a randomly selected director every month, as well as my Doctor Who reviews. But until next time, that's been your lot from Pop Screen. I've been Graham.
I've been Aidan.
And we'll see you next time.